Hello, everyone. Welcome to week number 6 in Biology 120. We've got a big week this week, as you do if you are taking the lab portion of this course too, and I'll mention that in just a second. So let's see what we've got going on. So last week we learned about DNA, mitosis, transcription, and translation. So transcription and translation are the way that DNA is actually used in cells to make all of the enzymes, and those enzymes are proteins. And so we're translating from a molecule of nucleic acid into all the proteins that a cell needs. And most of those proteins are enzymes, and enzymes run all the biochemistry in cells. And so those enzymes determine what type of cell that is and what type of organism that is. So that's why DNA is the blueprint of life. So we learned all about DNA last week. We're going to learn more about heredity this week. We're calling it genetics, but it's really the traits that we're mostly talking about this week. Also some epigenetics. We'll get to that in just a second. So what do you need to do this week? First of all, skim through these chapters in the textbook. Skim through chapters 11, which is about meiosis. So meiosis is a type of nuclear division. So you're dividing up the chromosomes in the nucleus. It's a type of nuclear division where you reduce the chromosome number. So meiosis is used mainly to make sex cells, but in other species, some organisms are haploid. That means they only have one copy of each of the chromosomes. So meiosis can be used that way too. But if you're just looking at human beings in the higher order animals, you're talking about making sex cells like sperm and eggs. That's the process of meiosis. Chapter 12 is all about inheritance patterns and Mendelian genetics, which you are covering in lab this week. So I do want to mention your lab this week. You don't have lab with me. You know, I don't teach you lab, I teach you lecture, but I have taught the lab before, and this is a pretty intensive week in lab because you've got those seeds growing, fast plant seeds, and so there's a lot to do. And then at the end of that week, you have to work out all of the genetics of the crosses that you've done. If you need any extra help, I do have some videos, but just email me if you need some extra video help, or I can show you how to do the Punnett squares. So anyway, just email me if you want access to those. So chapter 12 is about inheritance patterns, especially Mendelian genetics, and that just means studied first of all by Gregor Mendel, who was a monk who studied pea plants, and he figured out things like recessive and dominant traits and how many copies of each trait were in a cell. And he learned all kinds of things just because he grew pea plants, he studied their traits, and he kept meticulous notes on what offspring were produced by each one of the crosses. And so from all of those data, he figured out how inheritance works. And we still go along with what he said, even from back then. Okay, and then skim through chapter 47, which is about biodiversity. And there's all types of biodiversity. So there's gene biodiversity. You want to make sure you have lots of different copies of each type of gene in a population so that you ensure that some organisms will survive. You got to have species diversity. You got to have population diversity. There's all kinds of biodiversity out there in the world in ecosystems, from the smallest units of life all the way to the largest. And so you're going to learn about biodiversity in chapter 47. If you are in environmental science, this is definitely of interest to you. So make sure you read through chapter 47. This is in a totally different unit. It's at the very end of the textbook. Okay, so take a look at that. Read through your Module 6 overview and watch the videos. One is on meiosis. I don't know that you really need that one too much, but you might need it for lab. But you will absolutely need the one on epigenetics, and it is fascinating. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. Okay? All right, let's see what else we've got going on. So your discussion board postings this week. You got 2 things that are due, but you really should be working on 3, okay? So you've got discussion board postings about epigenetics. I'm going to discuss this in just a minute, including nature versus nurture, because this has been a huge discussion for centuries now, really centuries. What determines who we are as organisms? Is it our genes? Is it our DNA? Or is it our environment, how we're brought up, the stresses that we undergo, all that sort of thing? Wonder what the answer is. Is it simple? No. Oh, no, 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 no. Of course not. We're going to talk about this again in just a minute. Your journal entry. Okay, your journal entry is where you're describing to me all that you've learned about some topics during the week. You're showing me that you know the biology by answering questions. First of all, there's a question about how bacteria reproduce, because they reproduce asexually. That means literally they split in half. It's called binary fission. They split in half. There are no girl bacteria, boy bacteria. Nope. No dating on the bacterial scene. So how do bacteria reproduce? And because of this, because they asexually reproduce, then you would think, okay, then a whole population of bacteria, all the members are exactly the same. No, they're not. And they have to have ways of getting new traits. And there are several ways. All right. You see what I've got in red here? Chapter 22, Section 2. Please go to this section of this chapter, and you will be able to answer the questions in this section of your journal entry, okay? You're going to have a discussion about asexual versus sexual reproduction. What are the benefits of each? What are the drawbacks of each? Okay? Because both have both. Biodiversity in terms of evolution. So evolution is a change in genes in a population over time. A change in genes, DNA, in a population, that's members of the same species that live together in a place and time over time, right? That's evolution. So we're going to take a look at biodiversity in terms of evolution. How important is the ability for organisms to change? And I don't mean one organism. I mean the population of organisms, right? There's diversity in us as human beings when you just look at different people, right? We all look different from each other. So that also means that our biochemistry is different. So I'm going to talk about that again in just a minute. And you're also going to have a little discussion about genetic erosion in agriculture. So basically, most of our agriculture now is produced in gigantic farming operations. Sometimes they're called factory farms. They have all different kinds of names, but they're gigantic operations instead of family-owned, smaller farms.